Side Part. It's like a book club with your best friend, but make it a podcast. Welcome back, crawlers, to another episode of Side Part. I'm Nikki, your bookish bestie, and today I am just so excited to give you my final thoughts on book number 4 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, The Gate of the Feral Gods by Matt Dinniman. Remember, this is part 3 in a 3-part series. I will link parts 1 and 2 down in the description below. Also, don't forget, you're reading along with me. I have not read ahead, so all my thoughts, theories, and reactions are just based on books 1 through 4 in this series, which also means there will be spoilers for the first 4 books in this series. Also, remember, this is a very adult book with some dark scenes and some very dark humor. I will do my best to keep it PG-13 for little ears, but please be mindful of your audience at home. So without further ado, let's dive into my thoughts on The Gate of the Feral Gods by Matt Dinniman. Honestly, I don't even know where to start. I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but every time I'm reading one of these books, I start watching like the percentage tick up on my Kindle. So I'm at like 70, 80, 90%. And I'm like, as it gets higher, I just know it's about to get more and more chaotic. And I think I'm just guessing here, but I think Matt takes it as a personal challenge to figure out how can I cram as much chaos into like the last 5% of these books. And my gosh, did he deliver. This was by far just like the craziest ending he's had. I felt like in terms of like the things he threw into the epilogue, which we will definitely unpack later. But first, I kind of want to talk about those looming questions I had at the end of last episode. Mainly, what is the Gate of the Feral Gods? Like, we kind of had an idea. They talked about what it did, but I really had no idea how Carl was going to use this gate. It really wasn't clear to me. And I thought it was going to help, obviously, Juicebox become a bigger part of the series moving forward, but my goodness, I didn't see how he was going to use it at the time. I mean, Matt does a really good job of keeping us on our toes throughout these books, and I think that's why I find them so refreshing. Like, I like being constantly surprised, and I have fully enacted like passenger princess mode, I feel like, through this book and last book. The Iron Tangle kind of forced me in that position, and this book, I'm just really enjoying the ride at this point. I'm not trying to like theorize or figure out too much. I'm just kind of like taking the information as he's giving it to me. But I really didn't see Carl using it to, 1, rescue other crawlers outside of his bubble, and 2, use it to try to financially hurt the Boring Corporation. Like, those 2 things, I didn't see happening. I thought maybe he would use it to help the changelings like move to a lower floor, or somehow help his crawlers in his bubble like move down a floor or escape their bubble or something, right? But I didn't think he was gonna like launch this large-scale operation. And quite frankly, it was like so well coordinated, and he also used other crawlers to do it, which I really thought was a really important piece of his character arc, was like really relying on others in this story to kind of like task out things that they were good at. Like, he really leaned on Imani and Elle to kind of weed through different people to make sure that they were qualified to be rescued. And I really love where Carl's character is headed. But let's also dive deeper into the gate in flooding Laracos. I mean, it wasn't just that he used the gate, he was just so hyper aware of like their constant monitoring, and he led them down, that they being Boran, he led them down this understanding that he was going to do one thing and then did another. Like, he really had the Skull Empire believing he was going to send a feral god using the gate into their base and kind of destroy like their entire army. So instead, he knew what they were going to do after that. They stashed a lot of their NPCs in Laracos for safety. And Carl knew that. So instead, he opened up the gate right in the center there, flooded everything, killed a ton of NPCs. And I feel like this is where like my speculation of Carl having a savior complex kind of fully went away, because there's just like 2 pieces here. I think it's 1, Carl has a moral fiber to like want to save people that deserve it and that he's able to, but he also understands the limitations of the dungeon. And so while he will try to save NPCs when he's able to, he also recognizes that the NPCs in the Rocco's really have no chance of being saved. I mean, relatively no chance. Like, they're going to end, they're going to end up having a very gruesome existence, and it's going to be very pain-filled. And so he's kind of almost rationalizing it as he's doing them a service by making it quick and swift, and thus he gives a devastating blow to the Warren Corporation. And I think it's interesting watching his character kind of trying to tease out, like, who's able to be saved, who deserves to be saved, who's he going to go that extra mile for, who is he willing to sacrifice. I mean, I think Carl's character is becoming so much more dynamic and nuanced and, like, honestly a little bit more unhinged. But also, how could you not be unhinged in this situation? I think that's what Matt does so well, is he has that humor just for levity, and he sometimes lightens things with, like, their banter back and forth, but there's also these really hard choices and decisions that have to be made, and it's not a story where everything ends up being okay. It's truly like a horror book, and it's filled with so many terrible, terrible things that happen, and Carl's in this devastating situation, and there is no happy ending, I'm afraid, at least not in this book. I mean, nothing is going to end perfectly. Not every character is going to survive, and we see him just, like, displaying his anger and rage so much more overtly in this book. And he's also really not afraid to dole out justice. It's no longer like just like letting the, someone commented something on one of my previous videos, and it's just fits so aptly here. But in books 1 through 3, it's Carl kind of experiencing the dungeon, letting the dungeon happen to him. And in book 4, we start seeing Carl happen to the dungeon. And my goodness, that quote just aptly describes this book. We really start seeing Carl kind of owning what he can actually do and taking full control of that. We see this when, at the end of the book, Carl and Donut, and I think, is it his whole bubble? I think it's his bubble, the crawlers within his bubble, are tasked with protecting the puppy Orthrus and bringing it back to Emberus. And Quan comes out of nowhere like he does, and he attacks the dog for the loot that's attached to, like, destroying him, because obviously the AI loves to put the crawlers just in, like, these terrible positions where Carl has one quest to try to save the puppy, and then all the other crawlers are tasked with a quest to destroy the puppy, because why wouldn't the AI just create ultimate chaos in his dungeon? And Carl, he fights him, but he, like, tries to get him just to flee. Like, I don't think Carl wanted to hurt him initially, right? But this dude is relentless. Like, he's just like, when you're playing a game and you have, like, really good loot, but you can't help but just, like, try to get that next treasure chest, or you're always, like, still on the hunt for more. I feel like that's Quan. Like, he's a dude that's completely decked out. I think has the highest level in the dungeon right now, but it's not good enough for him. Like, if he has an opportunity to get some easy loot, he is going to do it. And then by the end of the book, Carl rips off his arm after he attacks the puppy, I think for, like, a second or third time. Don't quote me on this again. This is just my experience with the book. When Carl, though, is fighting Quan, there was two things that kind of happen. So one, in the fight, his brain is, like, trying to tell him, like, stop, he's not the enemy, like, and then he's also, like, having this battle with himself, and he's like, yo, F that, yes, he is. He's, like, the worst kind of enemy. And then, Carl kind of just, like, carries on and, like, keeps fighting him. But then, ultimately that fight leads to him dismembering his arm. And then Carl's kind of, like, looting the rings off his fingers. And he seems very detached while doing so. But there's one point, he takes off, like, just a plain gold ring. And there's an inscription in the inside. And it says, "For Daddy." And Carl doesn't even miss a beat. One, because he can't afford to. But he just, like, moves on to, like, kind of take care of business and doing whatever. But I don't think that little piece was, like, just something random thrown in. I think it was to humanize Quan, if not for Carl, for the readers, and just to remind us, like, yeah, this dude is, like, he's just, like, oh my God, for lack of better words, a little bee, and is just, like, the worst kind of person in the dungeon, right? Like, he's really just there to loot as much as possible and like, face the least amount of action as possible. Like, if he doesn't think he can win with his OP kind of attacks, he's just gonna duck out. But then, like, that ring reminds us that he's truly just a guy, and he was a dad at one point, and he's just trying to survive like everybody else, and he's trying to do it, I mean, in the way that he thinks is the best approach. And do we applaud his moral fiber? Absolutely not. But that little small detail really stops us as readers and reminds us, this guy's just a guy. Like, he's just a guy like everybody else that kind of got stuck in this really crappy situation. There's also this moment with Carl and Donut, like after the whole Quan thing. There's a quote I want to read from Donut. And she says, you know what, Carl? I've decided something. And Carl says, yeah, Donut. And she says, I think they're right about you. I think you're crazy. Like, not a little weird crazy, not a guy who eats cereal without milk crazy, but crazy, crazy, straitjacket crazy. And then they have this moment where, you know, Donut just says these things and Carl's like, yeah, anyway, and they just like move right along. And I think this solidifies something. One, I mean, it solidifies that Donut is like his ride or die. She's truly there just for like along for the ride. She is down for whatever crazy shenanigans Carl's going to pull. But also, two, I think this is like further solidifying that Carl is not necessarily the most reliable narrator. And if you had any questions about that before, these moments really kind of further affirm that he is not a reliable narrator. Moving forward a little bit, though, to my other questions, I had a question of what Carl was going to do once he broke his bubble, because we knew he was going to break his bubble. I mean, he is nothing if not motivated. But to my earlier point of Carl always like placing the welfare of many above the individual, and I think that's what it's starting to come down to. It's not so much a savior complex, but really him trying to always just move towards the greater good, at least what he thinks is the greater good in his mind. So as he's trying to pop his bubble, he essentially sends the necropolis crawlers to their demise. And I think he had a good understanding that like what they were doing was very dangerous, as everything they do in the dungeon is very dangerous. But he sends them on this mission, and he feels like this responsibility when they ultimately just get eliminated very quickly. And we really see this like humanization, and we know Carl is like a good dude at heart. We know this, right? But there's like the difference, like when he like injures Quan, there's like that no remorse, like F this guy kind of vibe. And then when these crawlers all perish after helping him, he just takes this moment to just really acknowledge like their suffering and their deaths. And it's also another example that the dungeon just like forces you to do its bidding, and it's going to send you down a narrative. Whether or not you think you have control is irrelevant. I mean, if it wants you to do something, it's going to get you to do that. And there's really just no way to escape the pain that you're literally forced to endure when you're in this dungeon. Ultimately, it's not lost on him that, one, they were able to pop the bubble because of their sacrifices, and then two, they were able to defeat the Quetzalcoatlus. I think that's how you say it. Quetzalcoatlus. Don't quote me on that. I'm sorry. I am nothing if not terrible at pronunciation, so let's move it along. But they were ultimately able to defeat the Toon Quadrant, and without their help, I actually don't know what they would have done. Like, he needed them to help him. Like, there was no way to avoid it, but it just seemed like Carl also acknowledges that like anyone that was in that quadrant really just didn't even have a chance. And it's just like one of those things with the game, like it's all up to chance half the time, and not everyone starts off at an even foot in any given level. And I don't think it's, again, lost on Carl, just like how deeply unfair this all is. And then I think that's also why I'm finding like Carl's planning and scheming just so brilliant. Like, one, he's using the information from the cookbook as, you know, covertly as he can, to not only use the information from that, but he also used the information that he gleans from the shows or the AI, the little pieces of information that he does get, to use also the people that, like Borant, using their lust for chaos and destruction against them. And he's hitting them where it hurts most financially. Like, he's kind of figured out, like just from the history with the Naga dungeon and how it just absolutely destroyed them to be ruined financially. And I think this is what Carl's starting to tap into. And I think this is how he's going to burn it all down, is to try to figure out how to make this dungeon completely devastate them financially. And I think using their own greed against them, right? And he knows, number one, Borant obviously is putting, you know, they're running this dungeon as cheap as possible because they don't even have the funds to begin with. So I think when he flooded the Rocco's, I think it was for two reasons. I think he was, one, trying to hurt Warrant, but then two, I also think he was trying to hurt financially the Skull Empire, because at the end of the day, like, and I think this is also like a reflection on our own society, like the worst thing you can do to somebody, aside from take away their autonomy and their agency, is take away their ability financially. And I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to use what little power he has to hurt them. Moving forward a little bit, I want to chat about Chris and Maggie. But before we do, I want to chat about something Maggie said. And I think I mentioned this in the last episode. But Maggie talked about how there was a chance that they can bring down people you know and love in lower levels. Like the people that are still on Earth, they can kind of use them against you. And we see in the epilogue, Ferdinand and Bee are still alive. And Bee's little, fling that she cheated on Carl with is also alive as well. And we see Ferdinand is not going to be rescued by Odette, but rather sold to Borant. So I don't know how that's going to shake out. But also, why does Odette want Beatrice? What is she going to do with her? And then it makes you question, like, is it to hurt Carl? Is it to help Carl? Where does his allegiance lie? Is he trying to divide Donut and Carl? Like, Odette is someone that I had truly have no idea where their allegiance lies. And actually, you know what? Scratch that. No, I do know where Odette's allegiance lies, and it's with Odette. Odette is entirely self-serving, and I could be wrong, but I really just feel like if it's not in her best interest, she's not going to do it. I just don't know what those interests are. I don't know what she wants with Beatrice, and I don't know how it's going to impact Carl and Donut. I would hope that Carl and Donut, again, that their just connection is strong enough to withstand that. And I think Donut has definitely shown us that Carl's like definitely her number one, but you know what? You never know. And so I am nervous to see how this plays out. So going back to Chris and Maggie, I feel like we can't talk about the scene with Carl rescuing Chris from Maggie without talking about Carl's mysterious pacifist sponsor. So let's chat about that. Just to recap, the sponsor was the one that only sponsored Carl and also sent them that weird root vegetable. And Carl was like, I have no idea what to do with this. But ultimately it was used to create the potion to not only let like Chris like pass through Carl, but also it allowed him to grab Maggie in the process. So again, we know Maggie is like a parasitic entity that was like in Chris's brain. And because Carl used this potion that Mordecai made with the help of Samantha, he was able to like retrieve Maggie out of Chris's brain and thus saving him. Which I think the saddest part about this whole scene is we kind of see that like Maggie isn't even like angry anymore. She's not even doing this anymore because of rage, but like out of just like immense fear. But also she drops some like insane lore when Carl's like talking with her at the end before he rescues Chris. And she says that like basically there's these caprids like Perpetente that are forcing her to do her bidding. And when she's trying to talk to Carl about it, she's silenced and she's like, why can't I say anything? Blah, blah. And then, they take away her voice. And then so we're left to wonder, who is this mysterious group? Why are they trying to help Maggie take down Carl? Like, what is the reason? I think Matt has a really interesting way of making us like quickly turn our allegiances or our feelings about a character. Like, yes, Maggie did some crazy, terrible things, but now we're starting to realize, like, again, she's like, even like the worst people in this dungeon are just like victims. I think Matt's really good at writing morally gray characters where like something, you're just really not sure like how you feel about them, and it's really hard to tease apart. Also, speaking about Carl's mysterious pacifist organization, we learned something really important about them in the epilogue. It's actually, so in the beginning, I think we get these excerpts from the cookbook, and there was a former crawler with the name Porthos in there, and in the epilogue, where there's like this conversation happening with Dr. Hugh, and we know he is the person that is, kind of like fronting as this pacifist organization sponsoring Carl. We also know he is the second cookbook author. He is part of the second edition of the Dungeon Anarchist cookbook, and his name is Porthos. So he's the same name as this cookbook author, so we can only assume they are one and the same, like, obviously. But we know that in the cookbook, Porthos took the deal and he has 100 seasons of servitude. But apparently he never lost his quest for vengeance, because he is aligning himself with Carl, and we get this just impression that he is kind of betting on Carl as his horse. He's putting all his eggs in Carl's basket. And also, can we just take a minute to talk about how nuts this epilogue was? Like, so much was just packed into this thing that usually just is like used to wrap up a book, and you're just like, I mean, B's back, Ferdinand's back. A former crawler is behind this pacifist organization that's sponsoring Carl, and you're just like, I thought I was like done with this book. Like, what is happening right now? Like, chaos. And also, like, let's also take a minute for the amount of litigation against Carl and the AI. It was like borderline hilarious. But also, again, just so confusing. Like, the litigation lawyer, like, kind of things in this book is still not making much sense to me. But maybe somebody can help me with this. But Boren seems to be like always at odds with the AI, and like it just struggles with the AI and is always fighting like against AI and like suing the AI. Why does Boren not just like take more control and ownership? Is it like a syndicate thing where you have to relinquish control over to this AI for the dungeon as like an impartial party? But also we know that the AI is very much not impartial. It hasn't been from the very beginning, and it has favored Carl from the very beginning. So is this like also just, okay, I'm going on a tangent here, but this is also just like kind of also poking fun at like our society and how we hand like things over to AI and then get like, you know, we kind of face the repercussions of that choice. I mean, I don't know. I mean, probably like, but there's also this moment where Mordecai is talking with Carl. And he says, there's a reason why the syndicate has strict rules about macro AI intelligence. Some believe that your people learn this the hard way. The primals, I mean, not the humans. All large-scale AIs eventually go insane. There's even a term for it, primal degeneration, going primal. And so we kind of get this, I don't know if this might be foreshadowing, but the AI is going to become increasingly unhinged as the books go on. So I think what we experience from book 1 to 4, it's only going to get worse. And like we see that the AI is actually like becoming crazier earlier, is like at least like Mordecai helps us have that understanding. And so we're just sitting there like, how is this going to get worse? This is already so unhinged. And then speaking of like, we were talking a little bit about like the political aspect and Carl kind of like trying to like impact them financially. But like one thing I felt like we were missing was like some of that like political scheming and context. Like we got a little bit of like through the glimpses of like litigation, or even just like what the AI would kind of like tell us about like being sued, or like those little nuggets of information from that. But I was missing like the shows and the information we got from the shows. Like I feel like in the first 3 books, we got a lot more of like those like outside interactions and what that looked like. And I just didn't feel like we got it as much in this book. But I also shouldn't say there weren't any shows, because we did get that weird like live boss battle hosted by Magnificent Troy and Kevin. And this entire show, it just affirmed that this dungeon is truly just like providing the illusion of choice. Like, because it was so apparent that like the narrative just like forced like Carl down into this boss battle. Like there was no way that Carl was not going to end up here, and they had this entire live show planned. And I think Carl also felt like this, but you kind of have like this moment of just like derealization, where like none of this feels like, of course this feels chaotic and unreal like 98% of the time in this book, but there's this extra added moment where Carl's like, what in the world? We're like underwater about to like battle like this octoshark and her babies, and there's just like this live show and music and hosts, and they're just watching this boss battle. And I think sometimes like these scenes are when I feel like this is like the most dark, because sometimes it just feels like, you know, Carl's just in this environment that's really hostile. But then like these things that pop up, it just reaffirms just like how messed up this all is, and how like all of these horrible, horrible things are not just like happening in like in isolation. Like it's all created for entertainment. Like, I think that's the most grotesque part about it, right? It's not just that Carl's experiencing something that's terrible. It's that it's to just entertain all these other people in the galaxy. And that's like, that these moments remind you of that fact. Going back, I think the battle between the Octoshark and her babies was like legit, actually insane. Side note, I forgot to mention this. On the way to this battle, that's when we find out that Henrik was actually killed. And that's when Carl obtains the watch for the Gate of the Feral Gods. But I feel like my heart broke for Juicebox in that moment. Like when Carl finds Henrik, and it just reminds you like there's just like another like unnecessary casualty of an NPC just like for this made up storyline. Jumping around a little bit though, at the end of the book, when Carl is trying to get Embers to meet with Orthrus, the puppy, we know that Carl started following Embers as an acolyte to not only like to be able to summon him essentially to finish the quest to get Embers to join with the puppy. And I understand why he did it. Like I understand why he did it. I am curious, if not a little bit concerned, to see how this is going to impact him as they move down to lower floors. We know there's 2 more quests that Carl has to do now. One, he has to figure out who killed Embers' son, and he also has to kill a god, Helik, Embers' brother, who Embers assumes killed his son. So no big deal. Carl just needs to kill a god, pay a 5% tithe, spill a drop of blood each, I think it's like, is it every 30 hours? I actually don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. And then he also cannot hurt anyone who follows Embers. And so I have to wonder, we know Maestro follows Gruul. Okay, I don't know if this is how this works. Can you only follow one god? Can you follow multiple? But I'm wondering, is Maestro gonna start following Embers, or is he already following Embers? Is this gonna prevent Carl from enacting vengeance on Maestro? Like, I'm just wondering. But I do think it's gonna become tricky at some point in one of these books, where someone that he's gonna need to battle or fight or something is going to also be an acolyte or a follower of Embers. But I should say he also has some pretty cool boons now. He can get into Club Vanquisher. I think he's also like immune to burns. There's some increase in some of his like buffs. So like those are all good things, right? But I might regret saying this. I think I'm actually kind of excited about this. It seems like it's going to benefit him more than it's going to hurt him, but like everything, I'm sure I'm going to eat my words. And now for one of my favorite segments, my favorite NPC of the week, which is Samantha. I mean, Samantha is quickly becoming my favorite character, aside from Donut and Carl, obviously. But Carl also launching her head out of a Chistera was crazy, crazy, crazy work. But she also helped Mordecai figure out the usage of that root vegetable. She is unhinged, and she's just like literally so funny and so aggressive. And she was honestly the levity that I needed in the end of this book. So I'm really grateful for her. I only have one favorite Donut quote from these chapters. And it was when Carl and Donut are on the plane and they're on the quest to get the puppy to meet Embers. And you know, Carl at one point needs Donut to take over the stick to steer the plane. And so Carl's yelling at Donut. He's like, grab the stick. And then he jumps on the wing, and then, you know, Donut's like, grab the stick. What do you mean grab the stick? Thumbs, Carl, thumbs. And I just love Donut. I love Donut so much. And if I had to pick a favorite character every week, it probably would be Donut. But nonetheless, I'm trying to give you guys some variety. So she's not my favorite character this week. Obviously I try to pick an NPC each week, but Donut will forever be the main character in these books for me. I have some honorable mentions that didn't quite fit anywhere else. in this book. And one, the projectile vomiting every time they use a water scroll was inconvenient, but also so funny and insane. And like also the fact that like they'd be on dry land, but they're trying to prolong the vomiting. So they're like taking additional water scrolls, even though they don't need them, just to like not have to spend minutes just like upchucking all this nasty water. I don't know why. I feel like I just needed to mention how crazy that was, but also like I thought it was like an interesting way to incorporate these water breathing scrolls, because we see with like the heal scrolls, there's really no consequence to using them. So having an unintended consequence associated with using these water scrolls made them just like so much more interesting to use. And like it just made it a little bit more complicated for the characters to navigate the water quadrant in this book. And I don't know, I appreciated that, as weird as that sounds. Also, kind of going back to that scene with like Carl asking Donut to like hold the stick and Carl's balancing on the wing, having him chuck like that hobgoblin disco ball with a chistera while balancing on a wing. And I think at one point he used his sticky feet ability, and it was just like, God, what a chaotic scene. But like also I would love to just have like a poster print of that moment. And if anyone knows anyone and then like has like an artist that sells prints of that exact scene, I would love that, because it was just like so chaotic, but also like so epic. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but Amani and Elle's like just kind of position within the story was like so pivotal. But we didn't really get to see a lot of them. We like got to, you know, talk to them through chat. But just even like Amani instituting that rule about not allowing them to use the gate to save crawlers if like not everyone within the bubble could be saved. And kind of, at first I thought it was kind of like, okay, like just save who you can. But I think there was something a little bit more to it than just like kind of having like a moral or ethical code. By having that rule, it kind of encouraged people to make sure they like work within their bubbles to work with each other to try to save everyone. And I think it just like maybe unintentionally motivated more bubbles to free themselves or to try to get everyone or access to everyone within their bubbles. And so I'm not sure if that was Amani's intent. At first she was just trying to be like an honest, ethical, and moral person in a dungeon that really makes that hard to do. But nonetheless, I appreciate it. I appreciated it. Something I think they've mentioned in previous books, but we talk about this more in this book too, is like on the next floor, they'll be able to specialize their classes, but we also know the guild system will become active. And we also know that Katya is going to be leaving their party. So I'm hoping with the guild system, they'll still be able to remain connected like Carl is with so many other crawlers that are not directly in their party. Truthfully, like, if I'm being honest, I did see a spoiler that Katya was going to leave their party at some point. And I thought I'd be really upset about it. I'm not. I actually really respect her decision. I think she's become, and I've talked about this before, but she becomes so strong. And I just don't think her goals really align with Carl anymore. And not in the sense where Carl isn't like necessarily doing anything bad, but he is kind of just like, it's kind of like, you know, Carl and Donut are this dynamic duo, and Katya was kind of along for the ride. But because she's becoming so much more formidable and pragmatic and sure of herself, I think she just wants to be in the driver's seat, and she has a little bit different of an agenda now in the dungeon. And I respect her for it. And I don't think there's any love lost there, right? Like, I think they love, I think Carl like cares about Katya so much, and so does Donut, and they love her for like the role she's played within their party so far. But I do feel like it's time for Katya to move on. I do. And I think what she's trying to do is both noble, and it's also going to be kind of difficult for her to do with Carl and Donut. And I think she realizes that. I just hope, though, if she does face Eva, I hope we get to witness that moment. I'd like to see that. Something else I want to touch on as an honorable mention is just like Juicebox's hyper awareness at the end. I mean, there's like that scene where she's watching the Dromedarians like relentlessly just like rebuilding their town again, and just the floor is about to collapse, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is just like essentially all for naught. And oh, also, she's apparently in love with Lewis. So random. But also, I think it gives her character like a reason to like not only like kind of connect back with Carl potentially, but also a reason for like moving forward. Like, and Carl even comments on this, like having love is something that like helps drive you forward and motivates you. So it's not a bad thing. I don't know if I think Lewis is kind of a goofball, but you know what? Can't help who we love, right? And then also lastly, Carl is now the #1 crawler. I don't know what this is going to mean though, moving on to the next level. We know, like, obviously their bounties keep increasing the higher they are on the top crawler list, but he also didn't get rid of the enchanted Nightworm Ring of Divine Suffering, despite Mordecai's advice. So he's still hanging on to that. So one, why doesn't he ever listen to Mordecai? But two, he's already going to be hunted just by his status in the dungeon, but now we know he has very desirable loot on him, and I'm concerned. And lastly, join me next week as I talk about Book 5 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, The Butcher's Masquerade by Matt Dinniman. Also, do you want me to break these books up even further for Book 5? Let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get alerted when there's new episodes. Thank you so much for crawling with me today. Bye.